Will Paterson, welcome to the DCQ podcast special sits. Great to have you on. How are you?
Thanks so much, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Excellent. So, are you joining us today from where exactly? Washington, D.C.?
Washington, D.C., rainy Washington, D.C. It's rained a lot overnight, and it's still quite rainy here, which is a nice respite from the very humid and hot weather we've still been having towards the end of summer.
So autumn hasn't arrived yet, because here it's already quite chilly.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. We're still having quite warm days, and we don't have much of a transition seasons in DC, unfortunately. So we'll pretty much have maybe a month of fall and then go into winter.
Excellent. So maybe I want to start the conversation with Canada, because I understand
Sure.
Canada is where you grew up. You grew up in
Yes.
Toronto. Toronto, I understand,
Exactly.
is one of the large cities in Canada, a center for business and finance. And maybe you can tell us a little bit, how it was for you to grow up there, and whether or not, that city was maybe the ideal stepping stone for, the international career that you developed for yourself subsequently.
Well, Toronto was a great place to grow up. I grew up a bit in the suburbs of the city, and it's really unrecognizable now from when I grew up. It's grown just so much. It's really incredible. But it's always been, or for some time, at least when I was growing up, it's been a very multicultural city. So growing up, going to school, we always had kids from all different backgrounds, all different cultures, languages in class. And then also just throughout the city, you meet people from all different backgrounds. So I think that was one aspect of my youth that really encouraged me and brought me towards more international work, because I wanted to continue with that and deepen it even more in my professional life.
Were your parents also sort of internationally focused, or is that
No,
something that you had?
So my parents weren't internationally focused, except for my father was born in Scotland, and he moved to Canada in his early 20s, without really much of a plan, but just knew that he wanted to get away from the UK for a bit, and Canada seemed like a good place. It wasn't as far as Australia, so he came to Canada and ended up getting a job. I'm the first of my immediate family to go to university. He ended up getting a job at Molson Brewery. I think 6 months after he landed in Toronto, and he was there for 38 years. So
Wow.
my parents, other than having the one parent coming in from a different country, although obviously culturally it was relatively similar in Canada to the UK. My parents weren't as much internationalists, so I really think that came from a desire um, to get to know the world. I mean, it's a big place, and we're a very small part of it. So it'd be great to get to know more of the world, and to bring people together too, to bridge those differences, which again, comes back to elementary school and all my schooling, where we were doing that just naturally every day.
Yeah. And is it, was there already from an early age an interest in the law? And or did that come later? Because, I saw that, obviously you went to law school, but there were other interests first as well, very much, internationally focused as far as I can see.
Yeah, well, my parents will tell you that I like to argue a lot. So, so I think maybe they were the ones, because I like to argue. I would call it debate more than argue, because I wasn't very combative, but I like to debate points. So I think there was an interest. I didn't, because I mean there were a few people in my family who were lawyers in the extended family, but I wasn't really exposed to lawyers that much growing up. So I think I think that it took me a bit more time to find those people who could be mentors and serve as that kind of role model and make me start thinking that law maybe for me.
And when did that come about? Because you went to college and you did, I think, international studies and
I did
economic, you know,
economics. Yeah.
but then you did decide to actually continue with law school. What and actually I saw that you also, went abroad, right? You were in LSE as well.
Yes. So maybe I should back up a little bit and say that my interest in international things really came to a head during high school, and I was part of a multicultural magazine called Mosaic, and I was just interested in international affairs, and I got the opportunity to go to Malaysia to teach English for a summer uh, just towards the end of high school. And so, as a relatively young kid, going with another classmate, but by ourselves to Malaysia, to a small town called Tanah Rata in the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia, was quite an experience, quite an eye-opening experience. I'd never been to Asia before, and I'd certainly never been to a developing country, and so it was. I really kind of caught the bug then, I think, and that's what also propelled me to go into international studies and economics in my undergrad. I kind of had this vision of working for the UN, and I was extremely interested in the UN. We went with my parents to New York. I think at the beginning of high school, and we visited the headquarters and had a tour, and all of that made me really interested in international affairs.
It's funny you say that because for me, um, I got, the bug of actually going abroad because I studied law in the Netherlands. But we did a moot court competition, the Philip C. Jessup International Law Moot Court Competition. And we were,
Yes.
the winning team representing the Netherlands. We went to the US, and I absolutely was bowled over by that whole trip. And one of the things that, we were also offered, because we were sort of hosted by the Dutch government to represent the Netherlands there, was going to the UN in New York, and for me that was also definitely eye opening, and for me for sure I went back and thought, okay, I'm absolutely going to try to find a way to study abroad, and I obviously ended up in New York. But it's great that so from an early age onwards, UN was already, uh, um, your focus.
Yeah, and to get back to your question about why the law, why the shift into the law, I did a master's, as you say, in London at the London School of Economics, and the master's was in public policy and public administration, and I realized during my master's and even maybe a bit before, but really during my master's, that if I wanted to try to help make big changes, that I had to understand the legal process, how the legislative process worked, and then also the law and how to fight for myself and others. So because at the time I was also very interested in human rights and in fact my master's at LSE was on the role of the Rwandan civil service in the genocide. So
How did
so
that
that's also
interest
kind of
in
a bit of a thread.
how did that interest in human rights sort of materialize for you?
I think it was really my views of my experience in different countries and seeing how people are treated in different countries, and also my own background. So my mother is Jewish, and quite a bit of the family passed away during the Holocaust or were killed during the Holocaust in Ukraine. So my mom's family's from Ukraine, and moved to Canada during the interwar period. And so I'd always been interested in how that could happen, how something like the Holocaust could happen and how to prevent something like that from happening again. And so that also fed into my interest in international affairs. But I think that interest in human rights and international affairs kind of coming together to in my work in the UN that I'm sure we'll talk about too in
Yeah.
Tanzania.
It's interesting because, yeah, I also, was interested in international law. So I did a dual degree, civil law and international law. But I found out that, in private practice, there is very little international law, and you sort of very easily, move away from the things that during your studies you may be really excited about and you want to sort of make, progress. And I actually, at one point in time, did apply for the EBRD when there was an option for me to, do something else. But I moved to a law firm instead and continued my, my life as a private practice lawyer. Only when I, started my own firm, DCQ, did I have the freedom again to sort of, go back to the old love and actually do something in the international field. Obviously, cross-border insolvency is something that, already gets you, across the border, but still very much in the private context. So it's very interesting that, you went that way as well. But obviously, you succeeded because you ultimately got where, where you wanted to go. But not immediately, right? Because, you went to law
No.
school at McGill.
Yes.
And what were your plans there? Because you didn't immediately start with international organizations. After law school, you started in private practice like I did. But you escaped
Yes.
subsequently.
Well, but if I can just add that I'm glad that you've come back to international work, because you certainly helped us at the World Bank quite a bit, and of course recently with Rwanda, which we'll probably talk about
Yeah.
later. But if I could just add that personal note, so at McGill, I went into law school. And I joke, but it's kind of true. A lot of us wrote these kind of save the world, relatively naive personal statements to get into law school. We were really interested in. I was still very interested in human rights and what the law could do to help protect people. But and in law school as well, I took quite a few international criminal law classes, public international law. I also took private law, but I didn't take any insolvency classes, which was interesting.
I didn't do
But
any insolvency classes either.
yeah. I think when you speak to a lot of insolvency lawyers, they have the same response. But I decided that going to a law firm will be the best training for me, just in talking to different lawyers and also talking to lawyers who were in the international space too. A lot of them had started out in a law firm, where I think that there's still a certain rigor and training that is really hard to get anywhere else. And the opportunities to work on lots of different matters and work with the top people, I didn't really want to pass up. So I wanted to get to a law firm, have that training, and then move on back to the international space, which is what I've been able to do. But it took quite some time to get there.
But in law school, you pursued both, criminal law, international law, and just the things you were interested in.
Yes, I mean, I did take corporate law. I did take secure transactions. I took some I think foundational courses that would help me later on in my law career. But I really did kind of pursue those interests more in law school. I also I got the opportunity to work. We had a legal clinic for the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and I got to work in that legal clinic during law school. and then I also got a scholarship one summer to go to the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which was my first exposure to international criminal law, and then that led me to go there, later on. So I really did, pursue my interests in law school.
And that was in Tanzania, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was in Tanzania.
We'll get to that. So then you finish law school and you stay initially in Toronto.
So there's one part that isn't maybe in my LinkedIn, but I think it's good to bring it up because it also relates to insolvency in many ways. I actually summered, so I did one summer at the UN in Tanzania, which was wonderful, and then the next summer I got a summer associate position at a firm called Couder Brothers in New York, and it was really one of the first international law firms to have offices in many different countries and work on cross-border matters. And unfortunately, the firm, of course, no longer exists. And my summer was the last summer of Couder Brothers after 154 years. So I got to see a winding down up close, but I also got to work on insolvency matters. So I did a rotation in the bankruptcy group, which was super interesting, and I worked on an Enron related file, and that was I was thinking about it before this. It was almost 20 years ago that I did that, so quite some time, and I got to also help. I mean, I wasn't before him, but I helped prepare for some hearings with Judge Gonzalez, who was managing the Enron case and who went on to manage the Chrysler case, and I think he also managed WorldCom. So it was a really fascinating experience and really started me on this route towards insolvency eventually.
So the work that you did was, enough to kindle sort of the fire to go into that area, even though I guess the experience of being the subject of a wind down and sort of losing, your position there didn't, result in you running a mile from this area.
No, but it did result in me going back home to Canada, to Toronto. So I went back home to Canada. I thought that maybe the gods were telling me I should go back home, and I went back home and work for McCarthy Tétrault in our article there, because in Canada there's not a long traineeship, but there is a 10-month articling requirement. So I went and articled at McCarthy's, and I also did a rotation in the insolvency group, which was super interesting, and that was the group that did some of the Nortel work too before my time there. But it was quite interesting. So it gave me another taste of insolvency.
Yeah, but then you wanted to go abroad, so you didn't stay long in Toronto. You set your eyes on London and went went here in one of the Magic Circle firms.
Yes. Yeah. So I kind of always wanted to get back to more international work, and the experience at McCarthy's was great, but I really wanted to be in a more international environment. And so the Magic Circle, or quite a few London firms, were recruiting in Toronto, and I wound up at Clifford Chance, which was a really fantastic experience for me. It really was a great firm to be at, and the timing of my joining was also interesting with respect to the insolvency connection.
Yeah, it was
So
not long afterwards.
I joined in 2007.
The great financial crisis hit us, and everything was insolvency all of a sudden.
Exactly. So I joined in 2007. I joined the capital markets team because the insolvency group wasn't recruiting internationally at the time. And so I joined the capital markets team in debt capital markets, doing a lot of securitization work. And then relatively soon after I joined, the global financial crisis hit in 2008. And our offices were were in Canary Wharf, or still in Canary Wharf, and we're just across from the Lehman International offices. And I remember that time really, really vividly, with so many people just visibly upset around Canary Wharf, with boxes, and it was a really quite a tough time. But then the kind of avalanche of insolvency work started to come in to the firm, and because of my interest, I put my hand up and said that I would be glad to work on some crossover work, with insolvent with capital markets, and then eventually I started working on purely insolvency work as well.
Well, yeah, because the financial crisis, it was all the, capital markets and structured products that were the cause of all the
Exactly.
troubles. So you need to unpick those and need those lawyers to
Exactly.
put them together to tell people, well, how do you actually read these documents? And what are they
Yeah. No.
supposed to
No.
do?
No. No, exactly. It was interesting. It was an interesting flip on the other side, having originated, quite a few transactions, and then being on the other side in an insolvency environment, trying to restructure some of them, and I was fortunate enough to work on some relatively large transactions with big investment banks, and the teams were relatively thin, so I got a lot of time with some really excellent partners there, and learned a ton, because things were moving very quickly, and there was a lot of innovation too happening in the market and in our work at the time. I think that the transaction that I worked on was the first of its kind, where was a fund of funds, where there were different options for investors, to either continue on in a new co, or to cash out, or get other notes. So it was really a very interesting time, very creative time, and very, very difficult time too in many ways, with a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights, a lot of weekend work to get things done. But at the same time, when I look back on it, I think that it was a really career defining time for me, and a time when I learned probably the most, about not only about insolvency, but also about um, how to write well as a lawyer, how to communicate well, how to diffuse situations, because there were also many challenging situations at the time, because tempers were very, very high. People were losing a lot of work and jobs even, and I was a junior lawyer on the file, but having to also deal with quite senior partners on the other side, in some cases.
Yeah, and navigating very complex, documents, lots of them, which shows how complex certain situations have become. Because if I look back, sort of, over the last 30 years, the complexity has absolutely grown, and yeah, having an opportunity to actually navigate these documents and understand the issues is a great, yeah, is a great foundation for whatever you're going to do subsequently. But you didn't, want to stay there. You at a certain point in time decided, okay, I've seen enough private practice, or there was another opportunity that sort of beckoned, and you decided maybe I'm going to have a go at that.
Yeah, so the judge who I worked for at the UN Tribunal became the president of the tribunal. And so the judge who I worked for when I was an intern in the summer, when I was in law school, became the president of the tribunal. And he and I had stayed in touch, and he said, well, the tribunal is going to be winding down soon. So if you want to come and have this experience, which I think you should, then you better act soon. And we have some positions available. You should apply. And so I applied to those positions and got one of them. And then the agreement with Clifford Chance, which was very generous of them, and they also supported my work at the tribunal, was that I would have a year off to go and do that work. So I was able to take a leave, unpaid leave for a year and go do that work in Tanzania. And then the idea was for me to come back to the firm because I still really enjoyed the firm. I like the people I work with, and I wanted to the kind of roadmap for me was to come back to the firm and continue working in the bankruptcy space, to move over officially to the insolvency department and to continue working in the bankruptcy space. But then I got to the tribunal in Arusha in Tanzania, which if your listeners don't know, which is in northern Tanzania, close to the border with Kenya. And it's a beautiful place because it's near Mount Meru and also Kilimanjaro. You couldn't see Kilimanjaro from Arusha, but you could see Mount Meru, which is one of the largest, tallest mountains in all of sub-Saharan Africa. It's a really, really beautiful place, beautiful country, amazing diversity of geography. And so I just kind of fell in love with the country and also the work, because I ended up becoming the special assistant to the president of the tribunal, and my work involved not only legal advising to the president of the tribunal on various issues and in some of the cases he sat on, but also work with the Security Council and General Assembly. So twice a year we would go to the Security Council and give an update on the status of the cases at the tribunal. And then once a year, we would go to the General Assembly and give an update to all member states on the status of the work of the tribunal. And for those who don't know, the tribunal was set up after the 1994 genocide in Rwanda to prosecute those most responsible for the Rwandan genocide. So just the level, the highest level. So ministers and others who are most responsible for the genocide. And I work for the president, who's the judge, and other judges of the court. So I was really an advisor to the judges. It was certainly a very interesting and also difficult experience dealing with that kind of subject matter every day. But I had really great colleagues from all over the world, and I felt like we were making a difference in the tribunal.
So you were actually involved in the matters, reading in and knowing, what the allegations were, reading the evidence and sort of helping with the judgment, or digesting the case and helping the judge, coming to a decision on it. What sort of,
Yes.
what was, were there lessons learned that you sort of have from actually being knee deep in these very difficult cases? Did it give you an insight, obviously an insight to the very dark, aspects of human behavior, which, we can see every day, on the television to a certain extent. But here, it's in excruciating detail. And, what was there anything that jumps to mind that sort of, helped you going forward, because you've experienced that part as well?
Well, I guess some of the main things that I learned are that, normal people can do absolutely terrible things because of the environment they're in. And I never really learned exactly what makes someone do that. But we had witnesses who were involved in just subsistence agriculture, who maybe had a neighbor who was Tutsi, and they, during the fever of the genocide, ended up killing them and their families. And this is someone who was a neighbor of the person and had relatively good relationship with them before the genocide started. So I guess it's
what's
a
that?
learning.
Is it the demonization of the other, tribe or race that you have? What sort of changed? Did you get any sense what caused it? Because it's all of a sudden happened. disaster strikes. And then actually now, looking back at our experience last year in the country, it seems to be, well, yeah, they've dealt with it in a certain way. But that's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, there were well documented, and this came up in almost every case, instances of dehumanization of the other side. So via radio at the time, which was very popular in Rwanda, and also even in schools and other environments, there was a kind of a systematic dehumanization that had been happening for some years before the genocide actually happened. There kind of been a building up of tension before the genocide happened. So I think that contributes to it, but I still don't think that it fully explains what happened. And I'm not willing to say that, because I remember someone telling me at the time that I'll come to see that people are evil, and that it takes a lot to make them good. But I still don't see it that way. I still think that people innately are good people, and it does still take a lot to make them do evil things. That's my view, at least, even after having spent almost 3 years at the tribunal.
Wow. And was there, remorse, forgiveness, sort of, those were the big things, I guess, from a distance that I remember with apartheid and South Africa and the reconciliation that took place there. Was that similar here, or was it actually no? They were diehard, defending their own position, and there was no remorse whatsoever.
I think that there was definitely remorse on many levels, and especially in the country itself for a lot of the people who did do the killing. There were these community tribunals that Rwanda set up called Gacaca, that were community tribunals, and they process cases in the community. So it was community leaders who led them, and they processed the cases in the community where there was definitely remorse expressed, and an explanation of what happened too, which I think a lot of families were looking for. At the higher level, I think it was a mixed bag from what I remember. That there were definitely people who expressed remorse, but then a lot of people, of course, expressed that they were not guilty of the crimes that were charged against them, because either they were just following orders, or they weren't linked enough to the actions on the ground, that their words really weren't linked to what happened on the ground with people.
Yeah. So that experience in Africa, was for 3 years, and then you sort of then there came an end to, I guess, the tribunal.
Well, the tribunal continued. It was winding down, and part of my role was to help create a new mechanism called the Mechanism for International Tribunals, which still exists today, and was both the Yugoslav Tribunal and the Rwanda Tribunal rolled up into one. And the idea of the mechanism was to be able to expand, because there were still 9 fugitives when I left the tribunal. So if a fugitive was caught, then they could expand the staffing and prosecute that person if they were at a high enough level. If not, it went to a national jurisdiction. So the tribunal was winding down, but and there was still more work to do, and I could have stayed, but I felt that after almost 3 years, it had been enough for me. And also, I mean, I'm gay, and living there at the time was quite difficult. I had to go back into the closet in many ways, and that takes a toll on anyone. It certainly took a toll on me, and I couldn't stay for any longer, even though I love the country, and it's such a beautiful place. I just didn't want to stay any longer.
So you went back to Canada then, and you actually, left the law for a little bit and focused on economics as in Canada, right?
Exactly. Yes. So I applied to there's a program still exists and is very popular in Canada to bring people back from abroad. So kind of a reverse brain drain program at the federal government level, and it's called the Recruitment of Policy Leaders program, and it tries to bring people back into the country and start in the public service at a mid level. So normally you'd have to start at the bottom and then kind of work your way up. Well, this program, what it lets you do is start at the mid tier level and also work in almost any department in government. So it's quite a rigorous process to get in, including interviews with very senior people that are kind of have case study situations in them, and then various other tests. But then when you get into the program, they assign you a guide, and that guide helps you figure out what the opportunities are in government. And I ended up landing at the Department of Finance because they were looking for someone who had experience during the global financial crisis in a major market to help with the Canadian regulation that was still being formulated. And they didn't have as many people at the time on the team who had that private sector experience, practical experience. So they wanted to bring me on board to help them with that, and they did. I mean, even though my title was Senior Economist, I and I wasn't a legal advisor. I worked very closely with our legal department on many different aspects of regulation, but also I also helped create the medium-term notes program for Canada for the foreign reserves. The group that I was part of was the financial markets group, and part of the role of the department was regulatory, and then part of the role was also raising money for Canada's reserves and also the domestic debt program as well. So it was really fascinating. I had not been exposed to the regulatory side of things. I'd just been kind of a consumer of the regulations when I was in the UK. So it was really interesting to be able to work on the process and how regulation is made and the important consultations that are done with all the stakeholders, and then to understand how government works from the inside and how decisions are made was also really invaluable to me. But I ended up moving on from the financial markets department again because I wanted to get back to international work because it was very domestic focused, to the international group of the Department of Finance, where I ended up in the multilateral finance team working on different development banks and Canada's position at various development banks, including the two that I was kind of desk officer for were the EBRD and the Inter-American Development Bank.
And then you got an opportunity to go to DC as a consultant, but it was temporarily. You came, you then, went to London for, a short period of time at the EBRD, but then you had an opportunity to come back to, I guess, the position that you are still now. And, collectively, you've been in that position almost 10 years. And it is very much focused on financial distress, special situations, the special situation space, but from, quite a different angle than the conversations I've had so far with the various practitioners. You look at financial distress from the, the public side, the country level side. Maybe, we can, you can enlighten us a little bit. There is the World Bank on the one hand, then you have the IFC on the other hand, and then you have the IMF there as well. How do they, in the field of special sits, sort of operate together or, work alongside each other?
Sure. Yeah. So I got the opportunity to go to the World Bank, which was really great and kind of a bit of a culmination of all my different experiences, and I was able to use a lot of that. So the private sector, the international, the government, all in my World Bank work. And the World Bank, just for those who aren't familiar, our mission is to end poverty and to boost shared prosperity on a livable planet. So we work mainly with developing and emerging economies around the world to help them to develop. And really, that mission is what energizes me every day at the bank. But in terms of insolvency, the bank's work is primarily on technical assistance to governments. So in strengthening their insolvency framework, and that really spans every aspect of the domestic insolvency framework, from reforming the law itself to implementation of the law, creating insolvency regulators, capacity building of those in government and also professionals and judges, and then awareness raising to all the stakeholders who use the framework. So that whole area of everything to do with within the insolvency framework, we work on with governments who we only work with if they invite us to work with them. And then we're also the international standard setter, along with the United Nations International Trade Law Commission for insolvency and creditor-debtor regimes. So we have a set of principles that are the high-level international good practice standard for insolvency that we keep refreshing and making sure that it's still relevant. And then we also do research with respect to insolvency and why it's important in economies. And then you mentioned two other sister organizations. One, the International Finance Corporation, which is actually part of the World Bank Group. It's one of the 5 agencies of the World Bank Group, which includes also the World Bank. And the World Bank is actually the International Development Association and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development in one. That's what's known as the World Bank. But the World Bank Group comprises 5 different agencies, and one of them is the International Finance Corporation, and their mission is to help to catalyze the private sector in markets, to help create markets where maybe one doesn't exist. And in the IFC, their role with respect to special sits is very much in the investments that they have in the private sector. So it's more the private sector side practitioner role in individual transactions, whereas we work with governments on the whole framework. We don't work on any individual transactions because that would, of course, also be a conflict. And then there's the IMF, International Monetary Fund, whose role is international financial stability. And
it's like the central bank of the world, right?
Yes.
Even the UK, I think there's now a lot of talk that maybe they, cap in hand, need to go to the IMF to ask for some funding. So, you can see that on all levels, financial distress, keeps cropping up.
Yeah.
So that's basically for countries that are in trouble, that need additional finance. You have IFC. They actually invest in situations, and because they invest, other private investors are comfortable to follow. And obviously, if these loans, go bad, they need to be worked out, and the IFC, does the workout
Yes.
of the loans that they've given. And then, the World Bank, where you sit, the finance specialist is advising countries on improving their insolvency regimes, and and also implementation and setting standards. I thought one other thing that you also do is help with training the judiciary, right? That is an additional sort of string to your bow.
Yes, exactly. It's an extremely important part of what we do in the capacity building space, which is to train the judiciary, and we try to sequence our projects in a very logical way, where there's law reform first, and then there's capacity building of the government and creating the regulator, and then the judiciary, and then the awareness raising, which is bringing people into the system, because you want to make sure that the system is up and functioning well before you send a lot of people to use it. But the judiciary is definitely a crucial element, and in many countries we hear that from the judiciary themselves that they need a lot more capacity building on insolvency, because it's a technical area that many of them are not used to working in. And so it's really helpful. The feedback we get from them is that it's really helpful to them when they have these kinds of trainings that are specific to the judiciary.
So one thing that struck me, well, a lot of things struck me when I got involved, in some of your missions. One is that there is a huge part of the mission that relates to, policies and, politics relating to, the policies and how that affects ultimately, the substance of the advice that you give. But the other thing that I thought was, quite interesting and new to me was, how do you actually get missions? You need to, find the missions and get them financed as well. As an individual member of your team, you're basically generating the missions that are there. Can you say a little bit about the dynamics there? Because obviously in, private practice in a law firm, we all know that we need to pitch for work. We need to, get clients. But in the bank, it seems to be different. And IFC, you work out your investments. Maybe that is more akin to what it is with another traditional bank. But on your end, that is quite new and novel to me, who's been in private practice all my life. Can you maybe, say a couple of things about that? Because I'm sure that a lot of people are not really aware how exactly, the financing of these missions works and what your role in it is.
Sure. Well, there are various types of missions. So we have missions that are purely financed by the bank's budget, and those would be assessments. So official assessments like the Financial Sector Assessment Program that we do in most countries quite regularly, along with the IMF, and that's financed from the bank's budget and done on a regular basis. Then there are the country projects which are purely technical assistance projects, and those would come to us in many different ways. So we would maybe have colleagues in the field, because we have thousands of colleagues in the field who are working in the countries themselves in country offices, who may come across this issue and think that it's important, and have a dialogue with the government about it, which then eventually leads to an official request from the government. We may get official requests directly from the government. We always, again, I know I said this before, but I'll repeat that we always work on request from the government and in partnership with each government. We never go into a country without having that request and also the partnership, because it's very important in the work that we do that everyone's on the same page about the reforms, and that there's support for the reforms in the government.
But
So
is it
in
linked?
those,
Sorry. Is it linked to financing that is provided? And is that the reason why they come to the World Bank? They're happy to have a reform because it is a way for them to get certain financing that they need.
So then there are the last category of projects which are linked to financing, and those we call there are a number of different terms, but one of them is development policy operations, and in those operations we would provide funding, general budget support through a loan to a government if they enact certain reforms. And so in certain cases, insolvency is considered to be appropriate by both the bank and the government to include in those suite of reforms that will then trigger the lending to the government. And and it's a very, it's a very good tool, and that's how some of the projects come in to the group. But I would say the majority of the projects come in as pure technical assistance projects that are funded by either bank budget or also by donors like the European Union, and also the Swiss fund quite a bit of our work.
And these assessments, and improvements that maybe follow from the assessments will improve the, I guess, doing business scores of the country, that are important again for foreign investments in the country. So there is, a reason why people want to, improve their their rules and their practices, because on a yearly basis, they are assessed by the World Bank, and the scores of doing business in that country may go up. And if the scores go up, that makes it easier for the country to at least, try to attract foreign investment in the economy, right?
Yes, so that's another way that we did get quite a bit of work, is through the Doing Business report, which actually no longer exists. There's a new report that people can Google, or I can provide a link that you can put into the podcast, called Business Ready, or Be Ready, and it's it replaces the Doing Business report, although it still has as one of the indicators insolvency. This time it's called business insolvency, and it's also expanded in that it looks at more implementation of the insolvency law, not just the different elements of the technical elements of the law itself, but also implementation, and things like insolvency administrators, and whether there's a regulatory regime for insolvency administrators. So that also is an important part of what incentivizes countries to think about insolvency as an area to reform. But also, I think a lot of our research also incentivizes, in demonstrating that the link between access to finance and effective insolvency regimes. And we have quite a bit of research, empirical research, showing the link between effective insolvency regimes and increased levels of domestic credit to the private sector, and decreased interest rates, so better terms as well for the for the lending. So I think that also, because many countries, especially the countries we work in, one of the main challenges, and we know this because we have a World Bank enterprise survey that asks entrepreneurs, what are your main challenges? And in almost all the countries I work in, the number one challenge is access to finance for businesses to be able to start up and also to grow. So I think that research, that evidence also speaks to policymakers who want to grow the economy and make it a better place for investors as well. Because investors also look at, as you said, investors look at these reports like the Business Ready report, and the environment in the country, to see how hard it will be to get at least some of their investment back if things go wrong.
So in the sort of almost 10 years that you've been at the World Bank in this role, with this focus on special sits, what have been the main themes that you've seen the focus on them in the space? I mean, you're saying finance, maybe, finance in insolvency could be one. It could also be, is there a way to create a distressed debt market? Is there a way to, maybe focus more on rescue as opposed to liquidation? And I think, maybe the big theme that comes, time and time again in every conversation that we have is the stigma that is still attached to financial distress, which is very much related to the mentality that you have in the country. And insolvency is very closely related to culture and to, country-specific experiences. So if you want to change that, and obviously, we have seen in practice, in private practice, the last 30 years, a shift from maybe much more focused on liquidation, cleaning up the undertaker, to actually, A&E, rescue, and, keeping the patient alive and moving forward. Is that, been the main focus in your end of the special sit space as well, or are there different things that you focus on?
Yeah, no, I think stigma is a big obstacle to having real use of the insolvency frameworks. And I love the medical analogy, which is something that we use in almost all of our trainings because it's so easy to understand. And I think that that shift in thinking really does take quite some time. And I think, for our countries, it took quite a bit of time. There's still stigma involved in insolvency in many countries. So making sure that the last component of the sequence that I talked about, which is the awareness raising component, I think is extremely important in trying to bring people around to the fact that insolvency is a good tool to use early, because I think one of the main challenges we have in many countries is that people use the insolvency framework when it's too late, when there's nothing to save, and you just need to go into palliative care. Whereas coming earlier is really very important, and I think that's a theme we're seeing more and more in the space. Certainly, it's something we've been talking about since I joined, but we're starting to see countries, I think, be interested in early warning systems, which of course exist in Europe. As well as alternative dispute resolution methods of dealing with financial distress before it gets to court. So those are some of the themes. But I think overall, the focus of our work these days is mainly in implementation, which is, I think, something that I mentioned. So a lot of the laws that we work with in many countries are not bad, and they're usable. But there hasn't been sufficient implementation. And that usually means that there isn't enough government oversight of the insolvency process, meaning that insolvency practitioners are not regulated. They don't have capacity. And then also the judicial side, with the judges needing capacity, and then people understanding why they should use the framework and encouraging them to use it. So that's really been a big focus in our work. And then also the micro and small enterprise. So where laws do need maybe some reform is to have the micro and small enterprise simplified insolvency procedures, which is what we worked with Rwanda on, and I think a lot of countries could use that because their insolvency regimes were really built with larger companies in mind, and in many of those countries, 90% or above of the business activity and employment is within the micro and small enterprise space.
But how do you, as the World Bank, influence a change in mentality? It seems to me, from the limited experience that I've had so far with missions, is that a big part is dealing with the politics, which is almost like, a non-legal skill. It is not a technical skill. It is dealing with the people that actually can facilitate the changes that need to be made. And obviously, the budgets that need to be allocated to the things that will make a difference. Is that something that, how do you get skilled in that as, somebody with a legal background?
Well, I think understanding the dynamics in any country is really important, and that's why we always work with a local practitioner as well. In every country we work in, we always work with a local practitioner to understand the dynamics at work in each country. And then I think with respect to encouraging policymakers to make those reforms, I fall back to the evidence and the research that we've done. So I think if I can demonstrate enough evidence to policymakers with real world data that this will make a difference in their economy. It'll help grow their economy, because there's this thinking, I think, in that hopefully is dissipating, but did exist for a long time, that back to the stigma issue, that insolvency is just to liquidate companies, and not a popular topic. But if you can demonstrate that it does create real positive change for economies, and is not just for crisis periods, because of course during COVID as well, a lot of countries were very interested in working with us because there was a crisis. But even in non-crisis times, that it's important to make sure that these tools are effective and customized to the circumstances and culture of the country, and are implemented well, because it will help grow the economy, and make it a better place for investors to put their money.
So yeah, it is, financial distress is still a lot of the times criminalized, right? It is very much seen as the domain of fraudsters. But we all know that, financial distress has many causes. And, fraudsters is one of them, but not the only one of them. And that seems to be, politically also quite a sensitive thing, because the media is very good at reporting the big frauds, but not other reasons for financial distress. So, the picture of financial distress for the man or woman in the street is very much associated with, criminals and fraudsters.
Yeah, I think moving away, trying to move away from that perception is really important. And of course, there's a balance, I think, to be had there too, because there is misuse of the system in some countries, and especially the beginning, where a framework is just introduced, people may be testing it to see what they can get away with, but at the same time, at least what I've seen personally, is that that's a very small minority of cases, and so that small minority shouldn't become the headline for the whole system itself. It just should be seen as what it is, which is an exception that needs to be dealt with, and dealt with efficiently and quickly, so people know that they can't use it for that way, for that for either fraud or other misuse, but that the overall use of the framework is generally to deal with real issues, that that the insolvency law is a good tool to resolve.
Yeah. And in your space, with your aims and your tools, what does it mean for you to be successful? What is a successful, mission in your special sits domain? What needs to happen?
Well, our projects span a very long period, because of the way our funding works, and so we kind of come in and out of countries at different points, and so I can't say that we are able to start from the very beginning with an assessment, and then go to law reform right after that, and then go to implementation and awareness raising all in one project, because that just doesn't happen. So it depends, I think, on the phase of the project that you're in, what success looks like. But I think, at the very end of that chain, success looks like a country, people using the insolvency framework to resolve financial difficulties, and that stakeholders start to recognize that they can use the framework in a productive way, and they start to increase access to finance, that more investors start coming in, because partly, at least, because of the effective framework that was put in place. But I think every individual mission also, just has its own objectives, and for example, if we're going in to help advise on law reform, does the law reform actually happen in the end, or does it just kind of sit in a document? And of course, sometimes, we don't have control over the process, so it's out of our hands. But I think that I would really question if the law reform didn't happen, why didn't it happen? Were we not as effective as possible in our communications with the government and our advice? What was the breakdown there?
And you've been in private practice, so you sort of have a sense of what it is you need in private practice to be, I guess, successful in this space. Do you think that you need a different set of skills to be successful in the environment of special sits where you operate? And what would they be? What would be the things you should have, and what would be, I guess, maybe the negative characteristics that you should avoid because it's going to be difficult for you to have longevity in that space?
Well, I think that they're very, very similar, both spaces. And you can also, you should also give your opinion. I know you're interviewing me, but you've been there too, so I'd be
Yep.
interested to hear what you think. But I think that, number one, having the technical skills and the experience to provide the wisdom to client countries on where things can go right and where things can go wrong, I think is really important. So to have those examples at your fingertips, or to be able to get back to them very quickly with examples on how other countries do it, and know the technical issues inside out, but not only know them inside out, but be able to explain them in a way that that is readily understandable for someone who hasn't worked in insolvency for a decade. And I think that that's a skill that definitely cuts across the private and public sector, because you have to, as I was saying before, you have to really explain to policymakers and make the case that insolvency is an important area to work in. And then patience, I think, is very important, and that also cuts across because the
It's a marathon, not a
transactions and
sprint.
exactly, transactions, projects can take a long time. There is a lot out of your control in both cases, private sector and public sector. And so you just have to kind of take what comes and then try to make the best of it. And then finally, diplomacy and understanding cultural sensitivities, which I think definitely comes into play in private sector too, but a lot less than our work. We have to understand as much as possible about the country before we go in, and the dynamics. And that's why, again, we always have a local practitioner with us to educate us on that, because we're very aware of the international good practice and comparative country experiences, but we're not necessarily very deep in the country's own culture, own experience, and we need advisors to help us navigate that.
And yourself, you've been active primarily in Africa, or outside of Africa as well?
So I would say primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, but I've also worked in East Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East.
Because maybe we go back to sort of, the start of our conversation, you growing up in Canada,
Yes.
having its own view on, I guess,
Yeah.
financial distress, how you grew up, and then you go to developing jurisdictions like sub-Saharan Africa. You work in a space that is, a tricky space, because financial distress has the stigma attached to it. It's very, much related to the culture. What were sort of, the things that you've encountered that are quite different from, your home country, Canada, when you were dealing with financial distress in these jurisdictions? Are there things you could use? Are there things that were, different?
Yeah.
My experience was very much, in Rwanda, the fact that I didn't realize how enormously, I guess, still criminalized the financial distress space was. And it gives an explanation, if that is the case, why you can have, an economy and a shadow economy alongside each other, because, it makes sense. And starting from that premise and then trying to, provide tools is quite different from, where I usually practice. So that was quite a steep learning curve to see, you need to adjust your expectations. And also, if you need to explain what certain concepts mean and how they are supposed to be used, you need to understand the framework that, the people involved have from their own jurisdiction, which is quite different from, maybe what you have day-to-day experienced. So to me, that was quite, eye-opening and sort of, adjust yourself and still use what you know, but understand that somebody who's listening to it comes from, quite a different angle.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for me, what struck me at first, and I should have maybe realized this more before I joined the team, but I had worked in private practice. I mean, similar to you, on these big complex transactions that are maybe the 1% of what happens in the insolvency space. And then I joined the team, and I'm really back to basics, and so I really had to reteach myself, or teach myself for the first time, a lot of the basics, and make sure that I focused on the basics going into different countries, and made sure that I didn't assume that people understood certain concepts, or why they're beneficial, but that every time I go into a country, and this is also a challenge for me, and I have to remind myself every single time I speak to someone new, they're probably hearing about the distress space for the first time, and it's important to give that elevator pitch that is very pithy and connects to that person as well, because each person from their own background will also have a different way of connecting with this space. So trying to anticipate what those may be, and to really speak to that too, because we're also talking to a lot of very busy people in different parts of government, and also the private sector in many countries, and you want to be as quick and efficient as possible, and get the message across in a way that works for them, and that resonates with them.
Yeah, no, fully understood. In your journey from private practice to international institutions, was the career that you sort of developed for yourself, did you plan this, or was it very much something that just stage by stage developed, and you sort of took opportunities if and when they arrived? And were there along the way challenges that you had to overcome in order to progress your career, and are there maybe some stories or guidance that you can provide from your experiences along the journey in special SIDS ending up in the World Bank?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great question. I think in hindsight, I can kind of put all the pieces together and say that, of course, I was going to end up at the World Bank, with a mixture of doing financial sector, legal, and international work. But I don't think that I knew that I was where the destination was going to be. I think at every point along the journey, I kind of always had a sense that I wanted to get back to the international space, and as we've talked about, I've always tried to reposition myself to be able to take the opportunities as they come. So I think that being able to have the foundation in the law firm, which I think gives a lot of credibility to people in the technical space, and then the international experience, gives credibility to the developing organization space, and then the government work also speaks to the advisory work that I'm doing. But I don't think that I wasn't really planning to come to the World Bank. It just kind of, I did, as you say, kind of take the opportunities as they came. I was open to the opportunities as they came. I wasn't afraid of them. And also in my own kind of, personal journey, I didn't have anything at the time kind of keeping me in one place. I didn't have a partner, so I could take the opportunities as they came, and go to different countries. But I guess I also took a lot of risks too throughout the journey. I remember early on in my journey, someone telling me that I had to really stick to either the legal space or the policy space, and I couldn't go between them, back and forth between them. This is a very senior person in the Canadian Public Service who told me this, and I just thought, actually, no, I think I'm going to disregard that advice and see if I can make carve out my own journey for myself. And I was able to, to do that successfully, I think, because I was able to articulate at every step of the journey why my experience would be valuable for each position and what I would bring to each role. And so that, I think, that in a nutshell kind of explains a bit the journey that I took.
Yeah, because if you look with hindsight, indeed, you can pick the big bits and pieces that all work together in the job that you are now. But, that was not a straight line going there. There are always sort of, side roads and things that happen. But in the end, from an early age, you had the United Nations, maybe not necessarily the World Bank, in sight, and you ended up there. So did you along the way set yourself goals and sort of, achieved those goals? Or again, is it very much more a fluid situation?
I don't think in hindsight I can say that I set particular goals along the way. In terms of what the next thing will be. But I think that I just tried to, do the best job I could in each opportunity that I had, and try to learn as much as I could also from each opportunity that I had, and that, I think, served me really well going into the next thing, because if I look back, there are a lot of people help me along the journey, and you don't know who's going to help you on the journey. So I think it's good to make a good impression on everyone, which maybe sounds just obvious, but I think it's worth repeating, and then to stay in touch with people to make sure that you don't have to stay in touch every week or even every month, but a few times a year, reaching out to people and keeping that connection, I think, is really, really, really important. And that's also what really helped me on the journey. All the people who supported me and who mentored me along the way. I really could not have done it without them.
And Special Sits is, known for pretty full on, right? Usually it's a stressful situation that needs to be dealt with, and there's time pressure, and everything needs to drop, and therefore it's difficult to have a life outside the professional life. Knowing the travels that you do, and every sort of full on engagement that you have in your missions, it seems that it is not so dissimilar from private practice. It is pretty full on as well. It's not a 9-to-5 job in any way, shape, or form. So how has your profession made up your life, and have you had an opportunity to actually organize your life in such a way that there's also something outside of your professional life? And how do you do that when you're in a position like you, dealing with very international work?
Yeah, I think it's a huge struggle for everyone in the profession, because it is. I think everyone would say it's not 9 to 5, and certainly for World Bank colleagues, we're almost always traveling somewhere. So tomorrow I'm going to Mozambique, for example, to Maputo. So I'm leaving early in the morning, and I'm on planes almost all weekend. And then I'm away for a week, and I'm very lucky because I got married last year. It's going to be almost a year now. So I ended up finding a really wonderful husband in DC, and that's been really, really, really wonderful, and helps me a lot, I think, in trying to balance work and personal life, because there's a lot more impetus to make that balance when you have a great home life. But I think it's not an automatic thing. It doesn't happen automatically, but it's a negotiation and requires a lot of communication with your partner. We also have a dog, and she needs to be looked after, so we have to make sure that she's in the mix in planning things. But I think that constant communication, and then staying in touch when you're away, and then a bit of also give and take to at home, to make sure that that it's not just one way, is really, really important. But I've also tried to reduce my travel as well. So where I can, I am doing more online. Although in our line of work, it's I'm sure will resonate with many people. It's very hard to explain some of these complex topics online, especially if speaking to sub-Saharan Africa with the time zone and also internet connection problems. Maybe it's really hard to get across our points online. So you do have to be there at some point. But picking and choosing those times when you have to be there, I think is important to reduce the amount of travel, because it can get too much.
I have to say that was one of the other things that well, I knew that, but I actually was still surprised by it, how unbelievably more we were able to achieve when we're actually on the ground there with people in the room, as opposed to online. It was day and night difference, and with these things, you need to be able to sit in a room and hash these things through. If you need to get the attention too, and it's very difficult to monitor that online. You don't know what else is going on in the room, even though somebody has sort of logged on. So I fully understand that. So we've covered quite a bit, present and past, but maybe, looking in the crystal ball going forward. One of the things that everybody is talking about is obviously AI. And I wonder, what your thoughts are in particular about AI and MSEs, because to me, it looks like maybe AI is an opportunity to almost unlock, an unmet demand that is there with MSEs. If you can do this right, you can sort of, open up a big part of the business that is there. As you say, in most jurisdictions, it's a big percentage, but they're not using the insolvency tools in the way that, if they would, it would improve things a lot, including the mentality. And maybe AI and making the threshold for access to information and simplifying the procedures, as we've sort of done in Rwanda, is the future. And actually there may be a lot of ground covered if you do that well.
No, I agree. I think that AI is definitely part of the future, and the key point that you also emphasized is doing it right, because doing it before the models are ready and the tools are ready, I think can be very, very detrimental to countries, because you don't want AI models giving out incorrect information or leading people down a wrong path. So I think that it's important to make sure that the tools are at the level that they need to be before they're rolled out, and that the experimentation is done within a confined sandbox space before it's rolled out to whole countries. And we've seen a few examples of AI so far being used in this space. One is and being used in the smaller enterprise space. One is as a chatbot agent that can answer questions about the insolvency framework and the tools available to them and resources available to them. So we've seen that being rolled out in some countries, and I don't know how well that's working so far, but we'll follow up with those countries to see how it's working. And then beyond that, some regulators in developed countries are using AI as well to sort through reports that they're getting from insolvency practitioners and other information to look for patterns and for red flags. So I think it could be very useful. I have to say that AI adoption is quite high in a lot of the countries that we work in on an individual level, but at the government level haven't seen as much. I mean, we haven't seen it in our own countries really either yet. So it's something to work towards, but it needs to be done in a very responsible way that's tested thoroughly before it's rolled out to people who who may not be able to understand the consequences or the nuances that AI may not bring, or even just incorrect information. But I think that it has huge potential to help guide debtors in especially small debtors through the process, and also help free up some regulatory time from the regulators to focus on other the most important things.
So it's hand in glove with digitalization, AI, that hopefully the two, working together may actually open up more opportunities to do things in the MSE space.
Yeah, and that's something we're working on quite a bit, because a fair number of my countries work still on paper, almost 100%. And so digitalizing the procedures is very important. Enabling the digitalization is very important, because not everyone who uses the procedures will have access to those tools in some countries. So you have to also be aware of that. But increasingly, everybody has access because everybody has a mobile phone. And so if you can make it more accessible through digitalization, then things also become much more efficient too. And you have a lot more data at your fingertips. One of the projects we're working on right now is data in insolvency frameworks, and making sure that there's sufficient data capture from the regulator's side to inform reforms that and changes that need to happen in the system, because we're of course much stronger reforms can be rolled out if they're based on data and experience, than mixed with the good practice, rather than the intuition of certain practitioners, or just feedback that we're receiving.
Yeah. But in your team and sort of, training junior people within the organization, AI is, a tool that is being introduced, because in private practice, that seems to be, a very big worry for a lot of people, is how we're going to actually, deal with juniors going forward. And that, again, has a knock-on effect on, well, what happens then with law school? Does that need to, change as well? Because, the practice is changing. Although, not everybody is obviously trained in law school for private practice. But, AI is going to have an influence there, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have our own tool, our own in-house tool, which is a private tool that doesn't upload any data or information into the models. So we do use that at the bank, but we're very careful to make sure that everything is verified, and that we understand the sources of all the information. So through the private tool, we're able to see the sources the information that the AI provides us, and it's very important that we check them. I personally use it as a way to kind of start something. So just start out instead of a blank page. I can have a bit of a starting point, and then from there I put in the work myself to fill in the blanks, and then you can also ask AI to critique what you've done, and I found that's quite useful. Research is also quite useful, but again, you have to really make sure that the research is double checked, because there can be hallucinations and incorrect information provided. So it's really important to check that. In terms of the younger people, I think it will be a big challenge, because if I look back to the start of my career at in private practice and at Clifford Chance in particular, it was tough to do kind of the grunt work that need to be done, reading the entire 300-page contract or whatever it was, and understanding it, knowing it like the back of my hand in case there was a question, and in amending the contract, understanding what parts would change, what other parts of the contract would change because of this particular change, etc. But I think that was such a formative part of my professional development, doing that work. And I know that that AI will hopefully, it'll help us become more efficient, and it will be a tool that those young people can use. But I also think that there's a lot of value in doing that very detailed and a bit grueling work to really understand and get a feel for how the contracts are written, how a transaction works. I think that that's also really important. So I think it's going to be a challenge to impart that knowledge that you kind of get by osmosis.
We did the reps, and now there's going to be different reps being invented for people to get, I guess, the skill that we acquired the hard way by reading all the documents and not only letting them summarize by AI. If maybe another question I have, looking in the crystal ball and seeing what we're aiming for going forward, do you believe that it is, feasible for us to move towards harmonized insolvency laws, or do you think that is actually a bridge too far? It is still going to be insolvency law is very much related to jurisdictions and cultures, and a harmonized insolvency law is unachievable.
Well, I think a number of jurisdictions have harmonized their insolvency law in the region I work in most. The Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa, which are 17 mainly West African countries that have harmonized most of their business law in order to increase predictability and bring in more investment. And in many ways, it's been a success. There's a regional court as well, high court, that deals with cases involving the harmonized law. So there are instances or examples of more harmonization, and I think that the cross-border model law, the UNCITRAL work, is also has led to, countries still approach cross-border insolvency differently, but it's led to some degree of, I think, harmonization of approaches that has helped to facilitate cross-border restructurings in many countries, and has been a very positive thing. So I think through that space, if there are more areas that where cross-border could be facilitated more through a similar approach, I think that would be really, really, really helpful. But it's, of course, not something that we we work in directly, other than setting the international good practice standards, which still have to be, of course, tailored to each country's individual needs.
Yeah, it's the guidelines, but then the substantive laws is going to be country by country. I know that in the EU they are trying to harmonize laws on avoiding transactions, for example, and again that may require huge changes in individual countries that have a different approach to that same concept. And if you do that on all concepts that you have in insolvency, it's going to be difficult. And I guess that's why, the UNCITRAL decided to have model laws as opposed to treaties, because you could never agree to a treaty. And in the meantime, practice had to deal with something, right?
Yeah.
So special sits as a profession has come a long way, I think, over the last 30 years. When you and I sort of started, there wasn't any special sits, or it was sort of a bolt-on to something else. But at the moment, I think it is very much a profession that you could choose if you wanted to. And if younger listeners are listening to this, what would you advise them if somebody had an interest in actually pursuing a career in special sits, be it in private practice, but maybe primarily if it was in your neck of the woods in a large institution, supranational institution like the World Bank? What are sort of the advice that you would provide them?
Well, I think first of all, it's a great profession to be part of, because it's very multidisciplinary. It deals with almost every aspect of law, and you need to use lots of different skills and lots of different parts of your brain, from contract negotiation to litigation to strategy. It's a really fun profession to be part of, lots of great people in it. So I think that I would say, if you're interested, then investigate more and see if it's for you, because it's a really great profession. In terms of concrete advice, I think that if someone wanted to join an international organization in this kind of space, it is important to get the range of experience before coming in. So I think that it's good to be more of a seasoned professional before coming into an international organization, having had some private sector experience. So I still think, and I still advise everyone who speaks to me about a career in international organizations to get that private sector experience, because I still think that it's one of the best trainings available for a young lawyer, and I see it in the people who come to us, who do and don't have that experience, that it really stands out, and then to pursue international opportunities as they rise, and try and do it earlier in your career, because it's easier to do, just from a personal perspective, and keep an open mind to different opportunities as they arise, and don't think that you're just in one type of law or one type of organization, but keep an open mind for opportunities as they arise, and then see kind of where it takes you.
Thanks very much. That is good advice. Really appreciate your time and having the conversation with me, and demystifying a little bit a very complex world in large institutions like the World Bank. Thanks very much, Will. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Peter. It was a pleasure, as always, speaking with you.